Well, as usual, I'm about 3 weeks late here, mostly just due to laziness. But hopefully this video is still relevant anyway. The title is a little bit clickbaity, I admit, but well, maybe even a little misleading, but hopefully you won't hold that against me once you've heard what I have to say here. If you're a fan of Wong's channel, you might have seen a recent video he put out talking about the Insta360 OneR 1-inch edition and his quite negative experience with the camera. Now, to be honest, I don't have a lot of counter arguments to the specific points he made. Most of what he says is actually quite true, but I kind of think that given the way he was trying to use the camera, he's failed to recognize just what an incredibly useful tool the Insta360 OneR 1-inch edition can be for filmmakers and YouTubers alike. This camera is much more than just another action camera. So I'll start by addressing Robin's issues directly. And if you're watching, Robin, I really like your channel. I'm something of a Micro Four Thirds fanboy myself, so keep up the great work and thanks for watching this video. So anyway, first point, stabilization. And I find it hard to disagree with him here. The fact that the camera doesn't apply stabilization in camera is absurd, especially when you consider how well stabilization has been integrated into recent GoPros and other similar cameras like the DJI Osmo Action. Having to import the footage into Insta360's own software in order to stabilize just seems ridiculous to me. I guess I could accept that if we were talking about like the 360-degree mod, because you need the software to reframe the shot and everything anyway. But for the 1-inch mod and the action cam mods, this just seems like an unnecessary step designed just to slow the whole process. I will say though that the quality of the stabilization and the degree of control you have over that stabilization is just awesome. It can produce some really fluid gimbal-like shots, better even than the GoPro and the Osmo Action camera. Well, in my opinion anyway. Now this brings me to another point that Robin made, where he was criticizing the stabilization while using ND filters. Now, despite the fact that you're able to put an ND filter on the front with this kind of electronic stabilization, which uses a gyroscope to track the movement, the camera's movement, the quality of the stabilization is just much, much better when the shutter speed is fast. If you try and follow the 180-degree rule and keep the shutter speed at twice that of the frame rate, 1/50th of a second, for instance, when filming at 25 frames per second, this produces really shit-looking, pretty much unwatchable footage. You'll have the same problem in low light too. If you use a shutter speed that's too slow, you'll start to see all sorts of artifacting as a result of that stabilization. Now, Robin does mention that the Olympus cameras have electronic stabilization and they don't have this issue, but it's just a completely different type of stabilization. The same problem exists with GoPros and other similar cameras. This is just a limitation of that technology. Now, for what it's worth, I personally think that there's far too much importance placed on the 180-degree rule. I know that DP Review did a little experiment a while back. They put out a video without using ND filters, allowing much faster shutter speeds, and much to Jordan's dismay, that video, after being out for a week, not a single person appeared to have noticed, and if they did notice, nobody commented. We're filming these videos for YouTube. These aren't Hollywood movies. The 180-degree rule is overrated. So there are situations where I might choose to use an ND filter with the Insta360 OneR. If you've got a little tripod, you can put it down somewhere and film. If you don't need to stabilize the footage afterwards, it's not a problem. I quite like having a nice slow shutter speed when I'm filming time lapses. Quite a bit slower than the 180-degree rule, in fact. I know there's going to be a lot of people complaining that they didn't buy the camera to put it on a tripod, and I get that. I kind of think you're the ones missing out. This camera is much more than just an action camera. It has a 1-inch sensor and performs much better in low light situations than any action camera will. When I've been performing with my band, for instance, I'll often record using this camera, and I've done so in some pretty terrible lighting conditions, but in every case, I've been really impressed with the quality of footage that I got from it. It's not as good as what you'll get from a larger mirrorless camera, but it's a damn sight better than what you'll get from a phone or an action camera. And I personally think the footage looks better than what I get from my Sony RX100 Mark VII. That thing costs $1,700. The other thing to keep in mind is that the camera has no record limit. That's something that can't be said about Olympus cameras. Doesn't overheat either, or at least mine hasn't. I filmed live shows for 3 hours straight with this and never had any problem. And when you throw in the extended battery base, well, you've really got a tiny little compact camera that you can pretty much put anywhere. This is really powerful for all kinds of filmmaking. Now, probably beyond the scope of this little reaction video, but I do think it's worth noting that this camera is also pretty awesome for landscape photography. It has a really wide field of view and you can take raw photos with it, and the photos do look really good. It can be a little bit of work to correct the distortion in Lightroom. You kind of need to use the GoPro profiles to fix that, but it's not too hard. It's also incredibly good for time lapses. And if you're filming video time lapses, you can actually add motion blur in the software afterwards. Believe it or not, this camera even has a function for recording overnight star lapses. That's pretty unusual for a camera this small. So am I saying that this camera is perfect? Well, fuck no. For starters, it's kind of useless for vlogging. The minimum focus distance is like 1 meter from the lens. So if you're holding it out without a selfie stick, it's just too close. You won't be in focus. The bloody door on this thing is an absolute pain in the ass. I've already lost it once and had to order a replacement, which wasn't cheap. And without that door, it's not waterproof anymore. The internal mics are shit, and even using the USB adapter, the quality of audio is pretty terrible. Here's what it sounds like with a lavalier mic attached to the USB-C adapter. Now, despite these flaws though, it's a really useful tool in my filmmaking arsenal. But the thing is, I did my research and I bought this knowing exactly what to expect. But in Robin's defense, it's pretty hard to find information on this camera. It really didn't make much of a splash when it came out, and I do think this is a bit of a shame. It's clearly not what Robin was hoping for, and he's certainly entitled to complain. It's bloody expensive and it doesn't meet his needs. I would encourage him to take another look at it though and see if maybe it might still work for him now that he knows what those limitations are. But I might also point out that there is another option worth considering. There's this, the Osmo Pocket 2. Now, using something like this mount here, you could attach it to a GoPro chest mount, pull up your jacket so it's not so noticeable, and away you go, POV camera. It's not as wide, but 21mm is still probably wide enough. There is a wide angle filter you can attach, which supposedly takes it to 16mm, but doesn't really look that wide to me. You can use this with ND filters and it will not affect the stabilization at all. It is worth noting though that you can't stack filters, so you can't use like an ND filter at the same time as the wide angle filters. So what else? It's surprisingly good in low light. If you buy it with the creator kit, you can use your phone to control it wirelessly. You can also use a wireless mic with it. So yeah, anyway, that's really all that I have to say. Hope this has been useful, and I also hope it doesn't sound like I'm being too critical of Robin Wong. I had a very different experience with this camera and I just thought it was worth addressing for the sake of balance. Anyway, thanks for watching. Bye for now.